cold. If you use the boarding feeder out front, they won't come to it because the feed is cold. If you use the top feeder, they won't come to it because they're clustered. Bees are clustered all year round. Just depends on how big a cluster is. But if it's warms up to 52 degrees and at night it's 35, they're not going to move up into that top feeder to take and get any syrup. So, you know, you need to take and make sure they're topped off. Now,
I'm sorry, so you don't put the feeders on the top of the hives, you put them as if they're just another frame in the hive?
Yeah, we use the black feeders, in-hive feeders. I do have some of the ones that's got steps, you know, the little round things, and they're supposed to climb down there.
Stepping them.
Yeah, I don't know. I usually try to cut those up and use them as spacers to make sure that they're open, you know. I don't like them. Once I've seen too many hive beetles go down in there and drown and then raise more hive worms, those little grubs down in there with them, you know. So I like to put sticks and leaves and stuff like that I can see, you know. You know, everybody, you do what you feel is best for you, because you've got to, they're your bees, and you're the one that's trying to keep them alive. We start looking for new yard locations, more pollination contracts. We try to go to every state meeting we can. And the most important thing is enjoy Thanksgiving. Eat that turkey, you know. So December is the same thing. We sell honey. We sell honey. We sell creamed honey. We sell a aged honey that's been aged in a brandy barrel, and we're booked out on it so fast right now. We just, you know.
Yeah, we got that brandy aged honey. It sits in a barrel for like 6 months. We have to rotate that barrel almost every day. We're working on a bourbon and a whiskey, single malt whiskey right now.
Same as if you go through the Kentucky breweries, distilleries, it's the oak barrel.
The oak barrel.
It has the chard inside. You give it the flavor and the color. Except you're using honey there instead of the mash.
Well, it's what those barrels are. They've been dumped or they've been used, so they're still wet on the inside. And then you put your honey in there, depending on how much honey you've got left over, so to speak, and let it sit in there. Now that barrel, when it's done, because it's going to leak and you can't use it again. So,
you know, honey absorbs moisture, and it will dry that wood out from the inside. And you have to be careful, because you can go to where your barrel is and see honey running out the bottom of it, because it's dried the wood out and it's shrunk. See, that's the great thing about the old wooden boats. They were set in water and they always stayed wet, so the wood would soak that moisture, that water up, and swell and seal the joints. When they put them in dry dock, they would dry out and create problems. You know, so yeah, the great thing about December too is Christmas. You need to take and eat ham then. Good for your blood pressure, guaranteed. Now, we start making plans on our queens, because we raise our own queens. I used to raise them a lot, and we still raise queens, but we raise them for ourselves. But we can't raise them as early as we need them, and so we have to make arrangements to get them usually we wait until they come, the ones in Georgia come back from California, and we have so many, and we go down there and we split those and to replace dead outs. We have dead bees too, just like everybody else. I tell everybody I've killed more bees than everybody in this room. So, you know, it's they just die. And sometimes you don't know why, sometimes you do. Sometimes it's a very simple fact that you missed that hive. It had the varroa counts were too high, or they didn't have enough honey. Now, if you're in a yard that's got 36 hives of bees in it, and one dies, you better look at it pretty quick, because the other bees are going to find out about it and they're going to rob it out. You know, so you can always tell when they're robbed out, because every frame in there is frayed around the edges. So we like to attend meetings, and here again we have old equipment. We don't have as much old equipment as we used to, because he won't let me keep it. I told him my hives were religious because they were holy. But he won't let me keep it anymore. So now our equipment is in better shape than it's been in 40 years. So, you know, that's just one of them things.
Keeps finding its way in the burn barrel.
Yeah, we got a barrel. That's where in the mornings when it's cold, we huddle around the barrel, tell stories, tell other things too. January is when we really start pushing pretty hard. Now, if anyone of you have been in your hives in December, if you'll look, the winter solstice is at the end of December. And about a week after that, a lot of times in our area, you can find a patch of eggs or brood about the size of a golf ball. Sometimes a little bit bigger, depending on the size of the cluster. And so we will take and push them by feeding them pollen patties. Now, I used to make my own, okay? And there's a lot of good patties out there. But I learned a long time ago, I use global patties. I used to use the 4%, but I now use their 15% pollen. Okay? That's 15% pollen. Unless a protein patty has pollen in it, it is not a pollen patty. Okay? It's a substitute patty. You have to have pollen in it in order for it to be truly a pollen patty. I used to make my own. I never could, and I like global because they will consume it so fast. It's unbelievable. Now, once you start feeding them, and I do not recommend this for everybody. I want you to understand, okay? Because we've been doing this for years. You can take and kill your hive by feeding them pollen patties too early. That queen will start brooding up. She'll start laying eggs. The bees will start tending to the nurse. The nurse bees will start tending to the larva and everything. And all of a sudden it turns cold. And they will not leave that brood. And if your cluster is not big enough, every hive in that colony will die because they cannot get to the honey. Okay? How many of you have seen colonies that had a lot of honey up here, but they died right here? I've had them. You've had them. How many people have? I know there's a lot of new beekeepers here, and I just want you to be aware. What has happened is that your cluster was not large enough to stay in contact with that brood. Okay? Your cluster was your honey's up here, clusters right here. That's where they stayed, and they could not touch that honey. As long as your bees can come in contact with honey, they'll survive. And they will move that cluster. But a lot of times, especially in our area, it'll be 55 degrees on Tuesday. Wednesday night, it'll be 26.
Like this week.
Like this coming week, a perfect example. It's supposed to be in the 50s. Well, in our area, I haven't checked y'all's area.
Friday's supposed to only be in the 40s.
Yeah. So, but if you've got a large, if your clusters are large, then they can stay in contact with that honey, and they'll move it. And inside that cluster, they will move the bees, that because they move bees inside the cluster all the time anyway. But what's in the middle moves out to the outside, so the ones in the inside can take a move in and get warm. So as you take, if you've got enough bees, you can stay in contact with that honey, they'll survive. But in our instance, if you're feeding, if they're growing too fast and they're not large enough with pollen patties, and it's a juggling act, you can take and lose your entire colony. But this year, we went through 3 yards this past week, and we had hives that had 18 frames of bees, 10 frames of brood. We had hives that had 15 frames of bees and 8 frames of brood. Now, that's disaster because we're concerned now about having swarms, everything going to the trees. Because they're, not only are they in the top box, they're full in the bottom box. There's no place for them to go. We put Trey, we had some boxes on, he put a couple on top of some of the stronger ones, and he had to work the next few days. So I went back and checked. They had already drawn out white comb and brought nectar in and put it in the third box. You know, it's very unusual for it to take and happen the 1st of March. So what we do in January, we have, we will treat, and we have to have emergency feeding. Now when we put a pollen patty on, we also put in a sugar patty. Okay? We used to make those too, but we don't do that anymore. I like to use AP23, and the reason, which is a dated product, and the reason I like to use the AP23, it has 2.5% of real pollen in it. Okay? But it is a winter patty. They will eat it, and which, now that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't take and put just the pollen, just the AP23 winter patty on it by themselves without any, because if they're a weak hive, I'll put that on them and let them eat it. But that additional feed will take and get the bees past a threshold and where they have to worry, where you have to worry as a beekeeper. So, but this time of year, everybody's seeing bees flying all over the place. You know, we're seeing the same thing. And, but I like, usually by the end of January and on into February, we take and we're feeding the pollen patties and the sometimes syrup. This year we could have fed syrup, but we didn't feel like we needed to because they were bringing in so much maple nectar and elm nectar and dandelion pollen, and I mean it's just rolling in. So, you know, if you have any dead outs, now's the time to take and clean up your yards in February and March. We usually take and make experimental graft the end of February. And we don't usually use those queens because we've always worried about having drones. We're going to use those queens when they come ready this time, because every hive we've got, not only does it have drone pupa, capped drones, we have drones that are in the column, full adult drones. And that's very unusual this time of year. Yes, sir.
Spring started early,
Oh, it started 3 weeks early.
so does it mean that,
Everything's 3 weeks early.
so does it continue, or does this end move up 3 weeks also?
That depends on how the weather hangs. Next week, everybody admits that next week's going to be colder. High in the 50s. I don't know what it's going to be here. Have any of y'all?
The forecast is in the 40s.
Okay. What we saw earlier was 50s next week up in our way. But that's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the height of the day. You know, it's going to be 38, 40 degrees in the morning. You know, and that overwintering is what you got to worry about. So, you know, we're very fortunate in that we have a lot of drawn comb for honey. Drawn comb is beekeeper's gold, okay? Because all you got to do is put that drawn comb on that hive, and they can't stand it. They got to fill it up. If it's empty, they want to fill it up, and they will go out of their way to take and try to fill that drawn comb up in your honey supers. So it was really in the early days. My extraction technique was to take my honey supers off, cut the comb out of it, and squeeze it through cheesecloth so that I'd have honey. Now I've changed a little bit. We have a chain uncapper and a 60 frame extractor and a sump and 5 storage tanks, and we put a lot of it in 5-gallon buckets and some in 55-gallon buckets. So it's but if you ever buy honey from someone, ask them if it's been clarified. Okay? If you're buying a 5-gallon bucket from someone, ask them if it's been clarified. Or if you're buying a 55-gallon drum, because you could buy, a lot of beekeepers will sell a 55-gallon drum, and you're getting right out of the end of that sump with all the parts and pieces and the bonuses that come in at the end of it that's being pumped into a 55-gallon drum without any clarification or any straining. And I don't like all those extra parts and pieces in my honey, you know. And your customers won't like it either. And that basically means that if you buy it like that, you're going to have to filter. I say filter, but strain it out, you know, because you can't put it in a jar and sell it like that. Now, we usually start our swarm preparations, but we're already behind on that, so in February. So we'll move on to March. We have by March we already have our pollination contracts, and we've already made our grafts. And usually in March is where we start putting our first round of supers on. But here again, write it down. I have logs. Some of the stuff I can't even read my writing. okay? Because back in the early days, I had to have gloves on. Now I don't wear gloves, and I can actually write now. But back when I had gloves, I was trying to write, and my letters were sometimes that high because I was trying to write with an ink pen. But I can't. If you write this stuff down, you'll have years and years of stuff to go back on. April. Important that you do not feed. Once you put your honey supers on, or plan on you don't feed syrup anymore. You know. I'm not going to say who he was, but I know a beekeeper used to take and put a 55-gallon drum of high fructose corn syrup 100 yards away from his hives. And that's how he made his honey every year. I won't tell you where he is. Well, I know where he is now. He's in the ground. But he passed away.
I seen one of those 55-gallon drums in Statesville. It wasn't up that way, was it?
No, it was north of that. Look, as a beekeeper, you have a responsibility to take and produce a good, honest product. It is worth what you price it at.
Frank, some people may not know what you're talking about with high fructose, like it's
Okay.
going to be honey to them.
It's corn
A
syrup.
lot of them are new.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So they make honey out of that instead of out of nectar.
Yeah.
Look, high fructose corn syrup is a lot of commercial beekeepers also. We do it. We feed them, but we usually feed it in the fall because we don't want to take and have a situation where it gets mixed in with your honey. Okay? Most people don't realize, but honey is made up of up to 12 different forms of sugar. The top three are sucrose, fructose, and glucose. Then there's haltose, maltose, and all the other toses. Okay? But think about that. You got sucrose, that's corn. That's sugar. You can buy it at Walmart or wherever you, food line, wherever you shop. Fructose you can buy there also. Oops. And fructose is corn syrup. It's sugar made from corn. And glucose, several people have problems with glucose sugar crystals because that's what causes honey to crystallize. Okay? And it's just the amount of the percentage. The higher your glucose sugar in your honey is, the faster it crystallizes. But remember, if the bees can live off of high fructose corn syrup. They can live off of sugar, sucrose. But you don't want to take and mix that in with your honey. During the 1900s, early 1900s, 1910, 1919, in that period, people used to take and mix sugar up and feed it to bees and sell it as honey. And how they got around it was they would take, and people would only accept it as honey if it was in the comb. That's where the popularity for comb honey came. Plus, it's always nice to be able to chew the wax. But they used to take and sell comb honey and say, it is pure honey. That's where that term comes. Pure honey. You want to be able to stake and tell your customer, I have pure honey. You don't want to have to take a look at them and say, I have pure honey made out of sugar syrup. You can't look them in the eye and say that. I couldn't do it. I could get out of it. But be careful how you feed them. So.